you wanted to get someone. You have a high profile witness, okay? High profile witness in the craziest trafficking conspiracy of all time, where a guy who may or may not have been an intelligence asset or an intelligence agent or whatever the he was for whatever country, this guy he's arrested for trafficking to elites, and then you put him in jail.
Oh my God.
With that guy.
We've all seen the headlines before, the names, the parties, the whispered accusations. But what we're witnessing now isn't just another resurfacing of old rumors. This is different. This is Paris Hilton, the woman who built an empire on being untouchable, suddenly scrambling as the walls close in. And the reason? A fresh wave of leaks from the Epstein files, photos and documents that don't just place her in the same room as Jeffrey Epstein. They suggest she may have played a far darker role than anyone imagined. This isn't about a decades-old party snapshot or a vague association. This is about victims coming forward, insiders talking, and a legal storm gathering, one that could finally force her to answer for what she allegedly helped cover up.
Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to the late convicted sex offender were made public today. They include photos, flight logs, grand jury testimony, and a lot of heavy redactions.
The panic started in earnest just days ago when the Department of Justice released its latest tranche of Epstein-related files. Thousands of pages, hundreds of photos, and a handful of damning details that have sent Hilton's team into overdrive. Among the newly surfaced images are a series of undated shots from Epstein's properties, some featuring Paris Hilton in settings that go beyond mere socializing. But the real explosion came from the testimony. Sources familiar with the ongoing investigations tell us that multiple victims have now privately identified Hilton not as a bystander, not even as a fellow guest, but as someone who allegedly facilitated introductions. Young women brought into Epstein's circle, with Hilton present during encounters that later turned criminal. One former associate of Epstein's inner circle, speaking on condition of anonymity, claims that Hilton's name was protected for years through a mix of legal threats and financial payoffs to potential whistleblowers. And now, with the FBI reportedly compiling a separate dossier on her connections, the question isn't just what she knew, it's what she did. Hilton's response so far? A carefully staged interview with The Times earlier this year, where she dismissed the idea of ever meeting Ghislaine Maxwell, despite a 2000 photo placing her alongside Ghislaine Maxwell and Donald Trump at a New York fashion event.
All together with a bow for her, doesn't it? She probably wants to get out early. So I think that we have more digging to do. I think the DOJ transparency effort here is the right thing, but the reason it's on a Friday, Will, is I think there are no smoking guns. There's other places we have to look.
I don't even remember ever meeting her, she said, a line that now reads like a scripted denial in light of the new evidence. But the cracks in that story are widening. Christopher Mason, the composer who first went public in the 2020 docuseries Surviving Jeffrey Epstein, didn't just claim Maxwell at Hilton as perfect for Jeffrey. He described a scene where Ghislaine Maxwell actively sought an introduction, calling Paris Hilton by name. While Hilton brushed it off as clickbait, the timing is impossible to ignore. That alleged interaction would have occurred in the late 90s or early 2000s, right as Epstein's operations were scaling up, and right as Hilton, then a rising star on the party scene, was rubbing shoulders with the same elite crowd that later became synonymous with his crimes. Then there's the money. Insiders within media circles have long whispered about Hilton's aggressive legal tactics to suppress stories linking her to Epstein.
But we have a congressional act now to requiring the release, but they're going to say, you know
subject
what?
To
Tom
redaction.
Hanks, it's unfair that he was mentioned because he was eating Skittles.
Subject to redaction. Subject to redaction.
And we all know what that means. That's to protect.
That's why I'm saying you will never be satisfied with what's released.
Two journalists who worked on unrelated exposé pieces tell us they were approached by Hilton's representatives in 2021 and again in 2023, offered five-figure sums for exclusive access to her ventures, on the condition that they dropped any mention of Epstein from their reporting. One of them, a freelancer digging into flight logs from Epstein's private jet, says the offer came with a veiled threat. They made it clear that if I didn't play ball, I'd never get another interview with anyone in her network again. That kind of pressure isn't just about protecting a reputation. It's the behavior of someone with something to lose. And now, with the Epstein files being pried open by congressional mandate, the strategies that once worked, silencing, deflecting, outspending, aren't enough. The turning point may have come last Friday, when the DOJ's release included a 1996 FBI complaint from an artist who accused Epstein of stealing photos of her underage sisters, photos he allegedly planned to sell. The document, heavily redacted but confirmed by the victim's lawyer to belong to Maria Farmer, proves that law enforcement knew about Epstein's predatory behavior years before his first arrest.
Dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I want to highlight specifically two for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and President Trump.
And here's where Paris Hilton's name re-enters the picture. Farmer's sister, Annie Farmer, has spoken publicly about being abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell when she was just 16. But in private conversations with victim advocates, she has allegedly named Hilton as someone who was present during gatherings where young women were groomed. Not as a victim, but as a participant. That distinction is everything. Because if Hilton wasn't just another face in the background, if she was part of the machinery that kept Epstein's operations running, then the legal exposure isn't just about social fallout. It's about conspiracy. We can't ignore the timing either. The House Oversight Committee's release of Epstein's emails last month included a chilling exchange in which Epstein told Ghislaine Maxwell that Donald Trump knew about the girls, a claim that sent shockwaves through political circles. But buried in that same tranche were references to other useful connections, people who could smooth things over when questions arose. Hilton's name wasn't in those emails, but the silence may be just as telling.
And there was new names in some of the emails that I think investigators need to look at. In particular, I jumped on the name of a modeling agent who, in a similar fashion to Jean-Luc Brunel, who brought underage girls from overseas to Jeffrey Epstein for abuse. There was another man. What was interesting about this other individual is that he also apparently provided young models for Donald Trump's modeling agency.
Sources within the committee tell us that additional batches set for release in the coming weeks include travel records and guest lists from Epstein's properties, documents that could confirm how often Paris Hilton was there and under what circumstances. And then there's the birthday book. The infamous scrapbook given to Jeffrey Epstein on his 50th birthday, filled with messages from powerful friends, included a sketch of a woman's torso signed by Donald Trump. According to 3 people who have seen the full version, it also contained a note from Paris Hilton that read, "To the King of Fun, always a wild time." That phrase takes on a very different weight when viewed through the lens of the allegations now swirling. Meanwhile, Hilton's legal team has been unusually active.
And Stephanie Ramos joining us live. And Stephanie, there have also been more cases filed in court with those accusers attempting to go after potential co-conspirators.
That's exactly right, Whit. 2 more women are suing Epstein's estate. They say they were recruited by an unnamed Epstein employee. Now, this is in addition to the lawsuit filed against Epstein's longtime friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is also accused of recruiting for him. Maxwell denies any wrongdoing.
Over the past 72 hours, her attorneys have filed emergency motions in 2 separate defamation cases, arguing that the new Epstein leaks constitute prejudicial publicity that could bias potential juries against her. It's a defensive move, one that suggests they're bracing for more to come. And the FBI's reported interest isn't just tabloid fodder. 2 agents who previously worked on the Epstein case, speaking off the record, say that Paris Hilton's name has surfaced in at least 3 victim interviews conducted since 2023. Interviews in which women described her as more than a guest. One agent put it bluntly, she wasn't just at the parties, she was part of the pitch. The implication is chilling. Hilton's alleged role may have been to normalize Epstein's behavior, to make his advances seem like just another part of the high life experience. If that's true, the legal jeopardy isn't limited to civil suits. It's about aiding and abetting. It's about being an accomplice. The public relations blitz has already begun. Hilton's team flooded social media with throwback photos of her charity work, a transparent attempt to shift the narrative.
Apparently not everything. We've got indications from the Department of Justice that there are things that are going to be withheld, at least, or handed out at a later date. Now, the law in this case that was passed by Congress and signed by President Trump required that all the Epstein files be released by midnight tonight, Friday, December 19th.
But the internet isn't buying it. Hashtags like hashtag Paris Hilton exposed and hashtag Hilton files have been trending for 48 hours straight, with users dissecting every old interview, every red carpet appearance, and every cryptic Instagram post for clues. Then there's the money trail. Financial records obtained by the Wall Street Journal in 2022 showed that Hilton's former business manager, a man with ties to Epstein's financial network, funneled six-figure sums through shell companies in the early 2000s. The payments were labeled as consulting fees, but the timing aligns precisely with the period when Epstein's recruitment efforts were at their peak. Coincidence? Maybe. But in the court of public opinion, and increasingly in the eyes of investigators, that's not a risk Hilton can afford. What happens next may hinge on the next document drop. Congress has demanded the full, unredacted Epstein files by the end of the year. And the White House, despite Donald Trump's earlier resistance, is now under mounting pressure to comply.
So first, I think we just have to say, and you set it up well, there are two real storylines here. One is what is in these files that we can see and that we can actually learn. We're going to get on that first. There's also the story about what is not in these files or what is heavily redacted, because that is also sparking a...
If the remaining pages include even a single email, a flight manifest, or a witness statement tying Paris Hilton directly to Epstein's operations, the dominoes will fall fast. Victims who stayed silent out of fear may finally feel safe enough to speak. Journalists who've been sitting on tips may finally publish. And the FBI, which has reportedly been building a quiet case for months, could move from observation to action. Hilton's team knows this. That's why the past week has seen a flurry of private settlements with former associates, renewed non-disclosure agreements, and at least one high-profile lawyer, known for representing figures in major misconduct cases, quietly added to her retainer. But here's the thing about scandals of this magnitude: once the dam breaks, no amount of money or influence can hold back the flood. And right now, the cracks are showing. A source close to the House Oversight Committee tells us the next batch of files, expected within days, includes a series of photos from Epstein's Little St. James Island, photos that allegedly show Hilton in settings that aren't just social.
The Maxwell interview is and never was part of the Epstein files. She was sentenced in 2025. This was an interview by Trump's lawyer to protect Trump from the fallout about the Epstein files. What this really is nothing but a sketchy PR stunt by the Department of Justice. And we have seen this movie before. The Maxwell interview is to the Epstein files what the Barr letter was to the Mueller investigation.
Another insider, this one connected to the U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General's office, claims that multiple women have now come forward with stories of Paris Hilton acting as a social bridge, introducing them to Jeffrey Epstein under the guise of modeling opportunities or exclusive parties. If those accounts are substantiated, if even one of those women is willing to go on the record, the story changes forever. It's no longer about rumors or old associations. It's about evidence. And evidence is what turns scandals into indictments. We're standing on the edge of that moment now. The leaks are coming faster. The victims are finding their voices. And Paris Hilton, the woman who once laughed off questions about Epstein as clickbait, is suddenly fighting for her future.
Breaking news right now. Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City. Epstein was facing trafficking charges.
The question isn't just what she knew. It's what she did with that knowledge and how far she'll go to keep it buried. Because if the past week has taught us anything, it's that the truth about Jeffrey Epstein's network was never just about one man. It was about the people who enabled him. The people who looked the other way. And the people who allegedly helped him hunt. The deeper investigators dig into Paris Hilton's ties to Epstein, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just about one woman's alleged complicity. It's about an entire system of protection, a web of power players who ensured Epstein's dark activities could thrive for decades. And if the latest leaks are any indication, Hilton may have been more than just a participant in that system. She may have been one of its architects. Epstein didn't operate in a vacuum. He had enablers, facilitators, people who smoothed the way by lending their fame, their influence, or their silence. And Hilton had all three. Her name wasn't just in the background of Epstein's world. It was woven into the fabric of it. The question now isn't just what she did, but who else was part of the machine that kept his operation running, and who's still protecting it. Let's start with the money. In 2021, a leaked document from a since-settled defamation case revealed that Hilton's former business manager, a man with deep ties to Epstein's financial network, had funneled nearly $700,000 through a series of shell companies between 2002 and 2005. The payments were labeled as consulting fees, but the timing is impossible to ignore. That period coincided with the height of Epstein's recruitment efforts, when his private jet was making near-weekly trips to the Caribbean, and when Paris Hilton was a fixture at the same elite gatherings where young women were allegedly groomed. Coincidence? Maybe. But when you factor in that two of those shell companies were registered to the same address as a known Epstein front, an office in the U.S. Virgin Islands allegedly used to launder funds, the picture grows far murkier. Then there's the real estate. Property records show that in 2004, Hilton briefly co-signed a lease for a Manhattan townhouse later linked to Epstein's network. The lease was held under a limited liability company, but three sources familiar with the arrangement say the townhouse was used for private gatherings, the kind that never made the society pages. But financial ties were only part of Hilton's power. Her real influence lay in controlling the narrative. Over the years, her team has been accused of deploying a playbook straight out of Epstein's own PR strategy: silence the critics, bury the stories, and if all else fails, drown them in legal threats. Take the Daily Beast in 2019. According to two editors involved, the outlet was preparing a deep dive into Hilton's connections to Epstein when Hilton's legal team intervened. The message was clear: publish the story and face a defamation lawsuit that could bankrupt the publication. The article was killed. Then there are the non-disclosure agreements. Over the past decade, Hilton's company has reportedly paid more than $2 million in settlements to at least 6 former employees or associates, individuals who, according to industry insiders, possessed information about her time in Epstein's circle. One NDA signed in 2018 explicitly barred the recipient from discussing any interactions with Jeffrey Epstein or his associates. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And it mirrors the very tactics Epstein himself used to keep victims silent. Of course, Paris Hilton isn't the only name in Epstein's black book.
It's layers upon layers. It's those Russian nesting dolls, and you open it, and there's another one in there, and you open, there's another one in there.
Corruptions at all time, bro. The Epstein files.
I heard there's no files. I heard it's a hoax. And then all of a sudden, he's going to release the files. Well, I thought there was no files.
Man.
He wants an investigation now.
The newly released files have dragged a who's who of the global elite back into the spotlight: Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, even the late Michael Jackson. But what sets Paris Hilton apart is how her story intersects with theirs at the most damning moments. Take the infamous 2000 photograph of Hilton with Ghislaine Maxwell and Donald Trump at the Annenberg fashion show. That wasn't just a random snapshot. It was taken at a time when Jeffrey Epstein's operation was expanding, when Maxwell was actively recruiting, and when Trump, despite his later denials, was still a fixture in Epstein's social circle. And Hilton was right there in the middle of it. But the connections don't stop there. Flight logs obtained by the Miami Herald in 2021 show that Paris Hilton took at least 3 trips on Epstein's private jet between 2001 and 2003. One of those trips was a flight to Little St. James, Epstein's infamous private island, in the summer of 2002. The logs don't list the other passengers. But we do know that during that same period, at least 4 women later came forward alleging they were trafficked to the island. So again, coincidence? Or is it possible Hilton's presence wasn't merely social, but strategic? Then there's the birthday book. The scrapbook given to Jeffrey Epstein on his 50th birthday, filled with messages from his most powerful friends, has become one of the most scrutinized artifacts in the entire saga.
The idea that there would be a list does defy common sense for any common criminal. Why would you maintain your own evidentiary criminality? But to Jason Chaffetz's point, that doesn't mean there aren't clients. Just because there might not be a list doesn't mean there are not clients. And Ghislaine Maxwell could be put to the test on naming the names, creating the list after the fact of people that she saw.
While much of the public attention has focused on Donald Trump's cryptic note, we have certain things in common. Jeffrey, sources tell us Paris Hilton's contribution may be just as revealing. Her message, written in her signature pink ink, reportedly read, "To the king of fun, always a wild time. Love, P." On its own, it sounds harmless. But consider this, the book was assembled in 2003, at the height of Epstein's operations. And wild time is the exact phrase one of Epstein's victims later used to describe the parties where young women were allegedly exploited. Suddenly, the message takes on a far more sinister meaning. And it's not just the words, it's the company. The book also included notes from Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, and even the late scientist Stephen Hawking. But Hilton's message stands out because of what followed. Within months of that birthday, Epstein's operation expanded rapidly, and Hilton's name began appearing more frequently in places tied directly to his world. Which brings us to perhaps the most damning element of all. The timeline.
To these girls, and that she knew that they were underage. How do you just have this be so one-sided? It is, I mean, it's such a miscarriage of justice. This is not what justice is supposed to look like. It's just, it's incredibly disappointing.
When you map Paris Hilton's public appearances against Jeffrey Epstein's known activities, the overlaps aren't just frequent. They're suspicious. In 2001, Hilton was photographed at a Hamptons party where Epstein was also a guest. That same summer, 2 women, later identified as Epstein victims, say they were recruited at a nearby beach club. In 2002, Hilton attended a charity gala in Palm Beach hosted by Epstein. Within weeks, a 3rd victim came forward with allegations tied to that same event. And in 2003, the year of the birthday book, Hilton was a guest at Epstein's New York townhouse for a private dinner. That dinner allegedly included at least 2 young women who later filed lawsuits accusing Epstein of exploitation. These aren't random overlaps. They form a pattern. And that pattern suggests Hilton's role in Epstein's world wasn't passive. It was active. It was intentional. And it may have been criminal. So now, let's talk about the cover-up. Because if Hilton was involved, she didn't just hope no one noticed. She fought to keep it buried. And she didn't do it alone.
It is clear in her testimony that there is an effort to clear Trump specifically. A lot of the questions are specifically about Trump. A lot of the answers very complimentary even in particular sections to him. But you just made the point to me that she's actually doing even more than that.
In 2020, as the first major wave of Epstein document releases began, Hilton's team allegedly contacted at least 3 major media outlets, The New York Times, Vanity Fair, and People magazine, offering exclusive access to her side of the story. There was one condition. They had to agree not to mention Jeffrey Epstein. 2 outlets refused. The third, People, published a glowing feature about Hilton's new perfume line. No Epstein. No hard questions. Just pure damage control. But the real pressure happened behind the scenes. According to a journalist involved in one of the canceled stories, Hilton's team didn't just threaten lawsuits, they offered incentives. They offered me a sit-down interview with her, all expenses paid, if I dropped the Epstein angle, the journalist said. And they made it clear, if I didn't, I'd never work in this town again. That's not spin. That's intimidation. And it's the exact same playbook Epstein's team used for years. But there's one problem with that strategy. The truth has a way of escaping.
Yeah. Why would you put him in the room and lock him in a bedroom, a tiny little bedroom, with a roided up?
Yeah.
Just stop and think about that. You're in a room smaller than this studio that you and I are in right now, with a roided up. You're sleeping with that guy.
And right now, it's escaping fast. The next batch of Epstein files, set to be released within days, is rumored to include internal emails and documents from his Palm Beach operation. Insiders say Paris Hilton's name appears in at least 2 of them. Not as a victim. Not as a bystander. But as someone allegedly useful in sourcing new faces for Epstein's gatherings. If those documents go public, the fallout won't just be reputational. It'll be criminal. Conspiracy. Aiding and abetting. Participation in a system that destroyed lives. And if Hilton falls, she won't fall alone. Because the same network that protected Epstein, the lawyers, PR firms, and media gatekeepers, is the same network that's been shielding her. And we're already seeing cracks. Earlier this week, a former Page 6 reporter came forward alleging that Hilton's team paid off a source inside the NYPD to suppress a 2004 incident report tied to Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. The report allegedly described a disturbance involving underage guests. The source was silenced with a $50,000 payout. The reporter was fired after pushing the story. That's not reputation management. That's a conspiracy. And it implicates far more than just Hilton. It implicates the system itself.
And we can tell you the top line here is that there's no client list, according to Ghislaine Maxwell, and there are no high-powered individuals that were on any sort of list. She did not incriminate anybody in that 9-hour interview that she did with the Deputy Attorney General.
So where does this leave us? With Paris Hilton, a woman who spent 2 decades crafting an image of glamour and invincibility, now facing the possibility that her past is about to catch up with her. With a network of power players who thought they could bury the truth forever, now watching as the documents they feared finally see the light of day. And with a question that's becoming impossible to ignore. If Paris Hilton wasn't just a guest in Epstein's world, but an active participant in keeping it running, what does that say about everyone else who turned a blind eye? The lawyers who drafted the NDAs. The journalists who killed the stories. The friends who stayed silent. The answer is simple. It says they're all complicit. And the reckoning isn't coming just for Hilton. It's coming for them, too. Now here's where things get truly dangerous. Because while the public is focused on the names we already know, the Trumps, the Clintons, the Gates of the world, there are whispers about others who stayed in the shadows. People who didn't just attend the parties, but helped organize them. People who didn't just look away, but made sure the right people were in the right place at the right time. And if the next round of leaks is as explosive as insiders claim, those names may be the biggest bombshell of all. So we have to ask. Who else is hiding in plain sight? Who else thought they were untouchable? And most importantly, who's next? Stick around. Hit that like button. And let us know in the comments. Is Paris Hilton just the tip of the iceberg, or the key to unraveling the entire sordid web? One thing's certain. The truth is coming. And when it does, it's going to shake the foundations of power like never before. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and remember. No one is ever as innocent as they seem.